Have you ever been alone in someone else's house at night, with a child sleeping upstairs, and the unsettling feeling that someone, or something, was watching you? Tonight, you'll hear 3 disturbing true babysitting horror stories that will keep you awake long after the lights go out. Story number 1, The Man at the Window. I was 16 when I had my first real babysitting job. The family lived just outside of town, in one of those quiet suburban neighborhoods where the houses all looked the same, and the streetlights gave off that faint orange glow. It was a Saturday night, and the parents were going out for a late dinner. They told me they wouldn't be back until after midnight. Their son, Dylan, was just 6 years old, and by the time they left, he was already asleep upstairs in his room. At first it was easy money. I sat in the living room with the TV on low, scrolling through my phone. The house was unusually quiet though. No humming appliances, no creaking floors, just silence. Every sound, even the ticking of the clock, felt louder than it should. Around 10 p.m., I heard it for the first time. A faint tap, tap, tap. At first, I thought it was from the TV, but when I muted it, the sound was still there. I realized it was coming from the front window. I froze. My eyes shifted toward the blinds, and I could see the faintest movement outside. A shadow. I stood up slowly, heart pounding, and whispered, "Hello?" even though I knew no one should be there. No answer, just silence. I crept toward the window, pulling the blinds apart just a little. My stomach dropped. There was a man, standing right there in the yard. He was tall, wearing a dark hoodie pulled over his head, and his face. I couldn't see it clearly, but I knew he was staring right at me. I jumped back and nearly tripped over the coffee table. My instinct was to lock the doors, even though I was sure they were already locked. I double-checked everything, the front door, the back door, even the garage. Every lock clicked under my shaking hands. When I got back to the living room, the shadow was gone. The yard was empty. Maybe it was just some random guy walking by, I told myself. But then, a few minutes later, Dylan screamed from upstairs. I ran up the stairs, 2 at a time, and pushed open his bedroom door. He was sitting up in bed, crying. "What's wrong?" I whispered, trying not to scare him more. "There's a man at my window," he said between sobs. My blood turned to ice. I went to the window, pulled the curtains back, and again, no one. Just the yard, quiet and still under the streetlight. I calmed Dylan down as best I could, and promised to stay in his room until he fell asleep again. I sat in the chair by his bed, trying to keep my eyes on the window, but nothing moved outside. Eventually, Dylan drifted back into a restless sleep. I decided to go back downstairs, but when I turned to leave the room, I noticed something. On the glass of Dylan's window, there were smudges, handprints, large, greasy handprints on the outside. I almost screamed. I raced downstairs, grabbed the house phone, and called the parents. They picked up, whispering because they were in a restaurant. I told them what happened, and the dad immediately said he was calling the police. While I waited, I shut off every light in the house, hoping whoever it was would think nobody was home. I crouched behind the couch, staring at the front window, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. Minutes felt like hours. Then I saw it again. Movement. The man was back, but this time, he was closer. He was standing right at the window, both hands pressed against the glass, his hood still hiding most of his face. I swear, he was smiling. I couldn't even breathe. Just then, red and blue lights flashed across the room. The man turned and bolted into the darkness of the yard as the police pulled up. By the time they searched the area, he was gone. The cops never found him. The family installed cameras around the house after that night, but I never babysat there again. And sometimes, late at night, I still think about that man's face behind the glass, and how he was patient enough to wait outside, watching us, for hours. Story number 2, The Silent Caller. Back when I was in high school, I babysat for a family that lived on the edge of town. Their house sat at the end of a long gravel driveway, surrounded by tall pine trees. It always gave me an eerie feeling, especially at night. One Friday, the parents were headed to a party and asked me to watch their two daughters, ages 8 and 10. The girls were sweet, and after dinner, I got them tucked into bed by 9:30. Once they were asleep, I settled into the living room with a blanket and turned on the TV. Everything was normal, until the phone rang. It was the landline, an old beige phone that hung in the kitchen. I answered with a cheerful, "Hello?" thinking it might be the parents checking in. But there was no reply, just silence. "Hello?" I repeated, frowning. Then came the sound, slow, heavy breathing. I hung up, trying to brush it off. Maybe it was just a wrong number. But 20 minutes later, the phone rang again. This time when I picked up, the same heavy breathing filled my ear. I slammed the phone down, my heart racing. I grabbed my cell and called the parents, but the call went straight to voicemail. I turned off the TV, suddenly too aware of how silent the house was. The ticking clock in the hallway seemed deafening. Then the phone rang a third time. I didn't want to answer, but some part of me felt like I had to. My hand shook as I lifted the receiver. The same silence, the same breathing. But this time, a man's voice whispered, "Don't look outside." I dropped the phone instantly, stumbling back against the counter. My entire body went cold. Slowly, against my better judgment, I turned toward the big living room window, and I saw him, a figure, standing in the shadows, just beyond the porch light. Too far away to make out his face, but close enough that I knew he was staring right at me. I froze. I couldn't scream, couldn't move. I just stood there, staring back at this faceless silhouette. Then he stepped closer. The porch light caught his features for a brief second, pale skin, wide eyes, and a twisted grin. That broke my paralysis. I snatched up the phone and dialed 911 with shaking hands. The dispatcher's calm voice was the only thing keeping me from completely breaking down. She told me to lock myself and the girls in an upstairs room until officers arrived. I sprinted up the stairs, waking the girls in a panic. They cried as I ushered them into the parents' bedroom and locked the door. I kept whispering that everything was fine, but my trembling voice betrayed me. From upstairs, I could still hear the phone ringing, over and over. Each shrill sound made my skin crawl. After what felt like an eternity, headlights cut through the trees. The police had arrived. They searched the property, but no one was found. No footprints, no signs of forced entry. Just an empty yard and that long, lonely driveway. When the parents returned, they were horrified but grateful we were safe. They replaced the old landline with a new system and even installed security cameras. But I'll never forget the sound of that breathing or that voice whispering in the dark, "Don't look outside." Story 3. The basement door. When I was 19, I took a babysitting job for a couple who had just moved into an old farmhouse outside of town. It was a creaky, 2-story place with faded yellow paint and a wraparound porch. They warned me before leaving that the basement door sometimes unlocked on its own. The husband laughed when he said it, brushing it off as the house settling. I laughed too, but deep down, something about the way he mentioned it unsettled me. The kids, a boy and a girl, were already asleep when I arrived. By 10 p.m., the house was completely silent. I sat in the living room scrolling on my phone when I heard it, the sound of a door latch. At first, I thought maybe it was the wind, but when I stood up and checked, my stomach sank. The basement door, which I knew had been locked earlier, was standing wide open. The air coming from the dark stairwell was cold, damp, and carried a faint smell of earth. I slammed it shut and locked it again, forcing myself to breathe. Minutes later, while I sat on the couch trying to calm down, I heard it again. Click. I tiptoed back into the hallway. Once again, the basement door was ajar, just enough for blackness to spill into the hall. This time, I heard something else. Soft, deliberate footsteps moving up the basement stairs. My blood turned to ice. I slammed the door and wedged a chair under the knob, backing away as quietly as possible. My hands shook so badly that I nearly dropped my phone while dialing the parents. No answer. I called 911, whispering into the phone. While I was on the call, the footsteps reached the top of the stairs. The door rattled violently against the chair, as if someone was trying to push it open. The dispatcher told me to grab the kids and get out of the house immediately. I rushed upstairs, scooped the kids from their beds, and carried them out the front door, barefoot, into the cold night. We ran down the gravel driveway until the house was just a shadow behind us. By the time police arrived, the basement door was wide open again. They searched the house from top to bottom, but found nothing. No intruder, no footprints, nothing unusual in the basement except a dirt floor and old wooden beams. The parents swore they had never had anything like that happen before, but after that night, they kept the kids with relatives until they eventually sold the house. To this day, I wonder if someone had been living down there, or if it was something else entirely. And those were 3 disturbing true babysitting horror stories late at night.